4 decades, a family harbored a dark secret within the isolated swamps of Louisiana, far from the eyes of modern society, a secret that would only surface in 1978. It was only when local authorities finally entered the Boudreaux property that they made a discovery which shocked even the most experienced researchers. They uncovered a family lineage that had practiced marriages among close relatives for over a century, resulting in one of the most disturbing stories of genetic degradation ever documented in the United States. The Boudreaux family settled in the Pantano region of Terrebonne Parish around 1850. That was when Jean-Baptiste Boudreaux, a Cajun fisherman, built a rudimentary cabin on the banks of an isolated bayou. The family remained relatively integrated with the small local community for the following 3 generations. It was only after the Great Depression, as economic difficulties intensified, that the Boudreaux gradually began to withdraw from social life. In 1935, Maurice Boudreaux, the great-grandson of Jean-Baptiste, decided to take his family to an even more remote area of the swamps. The outside world was corrupted, he claimed, and only family purity could be entrusted. A deliberate isolation began with this decision, one that would last for decades. 5 children were born to Maurice, 3 men and 2 women, who grew up with practically no contact with anyone outside the family circle. Consanguinity is not caused by geographic isolation alone, explains Dr. Robert Thibodeau, a University of Louisiana geneticist who later studied the case. The conditions for this genetic tragedy were created by the combination of this physical isolation with a distorted family ideology. From recovered ownership documents, it was revealed that Maurice had developed a kind of family doctrine based on distorted interpretations of religious texts. He held a belief that Boudreaux blood possessed superior qualities that needed to be preserved. Initially, he actively encouraged relationships between cousins, and later, he even encouraged them between brothers. What she saw is described by Ellie Carter, a social worker who participated in the investigations. Without electricity, without a radio, and without any connection to the outside world, the property was like an island in time. The younger children, who represented the 3rd generation of this closed system, featured obvious signs of physical and cognitive commitment. Relatively moderate problems were produced by the 1st generation of weddings between cousins. Marie, his first cousin, was married by Joseph Boudreaux, Maurice's eldest son, in 1953. 2 of their 6 children were born with polydactyly, or extra fingers, and 1 with a cleft lip. However, in the isolated family environment, everyone could work reasonably well. The true genetic deterioration began to manifest in the next generation, when the sons of Joseph and Marie were also encouraged to marry each other. 4 children were born to Paul and Annette Boudreaux, who were cousins, between 1971 and 1976. All of them were born with serious congenital anomalies, which included microcephaly, severe facial deformities, and deep intellectual impairments. You should check it out if you are already subscribed to this channel. Just one of the many disturbing revelations about consanguinity that we share exclusively here is the story of these Louisiana cousins. So you don't miss the next chapters, which reveal even more shocking secrets of these isolated families. Subscribe now. By chance in March 1978, the discovery of the Boudreaux family occurred. During a storm, a local hunter named Thomas Lublau was lost in the swamps and sought shelter near the isolated property. What he glimpsed at a distance disturbed him deeply. In the backyard of the main house, children with unusual appearances were moving uncoordinatedly. They were like beings from another world, Lublau later reported to the police. Some had disproportionately small heads. Others had twisted limbs. The whole scene caused me indescribable discomfort. A complex of 5 rudimentary houses occupied by 32 people was found when authorities finally entered the property in April 1978, all interconnected by a complex kinship network. That first cousins had already married for 3 consecutive generations was revealed by photographs and confiscated personal documents, and in the latest generation, even siblings had formed unions. His initial impressions were documented by Sheriff Dale Thierat, who researched the case. In 22, from the property, 17 children under 18 were temporarily removed and placed under intensive medical care. The alarming extent of the health problems was revealed by the exams. In addition to visible deformities, serious internal conditions were suffered by many, including congenital heart disease, kidney malformations, and severe neurological problems. Limited notoriety in the local media was gained by the case, but authorities endeavored to contain the dissemination of details and photographs, citing concerns about the dignity of the victims. However, Alice Boudreau, one of the few family members with the capacity to communicate articulately with external people, was briefly interviewed by a journalist from the Times-Picayune. "We didn't know there was another way," said Alice, then 32, herself the result of a marriage between first-degree cousins and married to her cousin Raymond. "That's how things worked since I can remember. You believe it when you grow up listening that the outside world is dangerous and that only the family can be reliable." A milestone in the studies on the effects of prolonged consanguinity became the Boudreau case. An anonymous study, protecting the identity of those involved, was later published by Dr. Victor Lamar, a forensic geneticist who examined samples collected from the family, and it became a reference in the medical literature. One of the most dramatic examples ever documented of the effect of harmful recessive gene homozygosis is what we observed here, Lamar wrote. Levels that made the manifestation of rare genetic conditions virtually inevitable were reached by the coefficient of inbreeding after 4 generations of consanguineous marriages. What emotion predominates in your heart when you think of the unimaginable suffering of these Boudreau children, confined to Louisiana's swamps for generations? Leave in the comments. The pain of these children makes me reflect on humanity. To social workers, the older children, capable of basic communication, reported disturbing aspects of family life. How they were taught early on that marrying outside people meant betraying the family and contaminating the lineage was explained by Martha Boudreau, then 14. "Our blood was special," Uncle Jerome always said, "and that we had to keep it pure." He showed photographs of people from the city and said they were all sick and weak when any of us questioned it, she recounted. On the property, the most tragic of the findings was made in a small makeshift cemetery. Hidden between cypresses and partially submerged in the swamp, it contained 23 rudimentary graves, most of babies and young children who had not survived due to extreme deformities. Many of these births had never been officially recorded. Consistent patterns of compromised cognitive development even among those who did not have apparent physical deformities were found by Dr. Patricia Montgomery, a psychologist designated to evaluate adult family members. The combined effects of extreme social isolation, repeated consanguinity, and educational and cultural deprivation are what we observed, she concluded in her report. Ironically, a valuable source for researchers became the records meticulously maintained by Maurice Boudreau, the original patriarch who began the family isolation. Between 1935 and 1968, his diaries, written, obsessively documented genealogies, births, and physical characteristics of the descendants, often with disturbing observations on how to improve the lineage through specific unions. A complex issue for Louisiana's social assistance system became the destiny of the Boudreaux. To specialized institutions, the most severely affected, with multiple commitments, were sent. In adoptive homes, those with greater functional capacity were placed, although their unusual family history and behavioral problems resulting from extreme isolation made successful adaptations difficult. Monumental challenges were faced by these children, recalls Shelley Romos, one of the social workers designated for the case. There was cultural shock in addition to the physical and cognitive limitations resulting from consanguinity. Many had never seen a television, did not know what a telephone was, and had extremely limited concepts about the world beyond the swamps. Their own set of difficulties was faced by the family adults. Their integration into conventional society proved virtually impossible, with no professional skills, no formal education, and often presenting moderate cognitive problems. Under regular supervision by the authorities to prevent the reconstitution of the old family arrangement, some remained in nearby rural areas. Legislative debates in the state were provoked by the case. Partially motivated by the Boudreau case, though never explicitly mentioned, Louisiana strengthened its laws against consanguineous marriages in 1980, including more severe penalties and expanding the legal definition of prohibited relationships to explicitly include first cousins. Equally significant was the scientific legacy. In pioneering research on rare genetic diseases, genetic samples collected with judicial consent, as many had no legal ability to consent, were used. Mutation patterns that helped identify specific genes associated with various conditions were revealed by chromosomal analysis. Although the circumstances are deeply tragic, advances in understanding multiple rare conditions were allowed by the genetic data obtained, explains geneticist Eleanor Bro, who studied the samples. Specific standards of genetic expression that would normally be extremely rare in the general population were identified by us. That of Daniel Boudreau, born in 1975, was among the most studied cases, who had an extraordinary combination of phenylketonuria, PKU, Meacham syndrome, a rare sialenopathy disturbance, and an unusual form of albinism. Infinitesimally small would be the mathematical probability of these three recessive genetic conditions manifesting simultaneously in an individual from the general population. But multiple deleterious genes had been concentrated by the consanguinity repeated over generations. During investigations, a particularly disturbing aspect was revealed: the gradual normalization of deformities within the family system. His own classification for the different types of children born in the family had been developed by Jerome Boudreau in his own records, giving them functions based on their abilities. It is evident that over the generations, the family developed its own social system that accommodated and categorized the growing abnormalities, said anthropologist Dr. Andrzej Leitzka. A perverse hierarchy based on the type and gravity of genetic impairments was created by designating children with certain types of deformities for certain family functions. The progressive genetic deterioration over generations is documented by the recovered photographic evidence from the property, today maintained in confidential files. By comparing images from the 1950s with those of the 1970s, experts were able to trace the visible climb of anomalies as consanguineous marriages intensified. In the first generation of weddings between cousins, photographs show subtle facial asymmetries and occasional digital anomalies, extra or fused fingers, explains Dr. Lamar. Children with obvious craniofacial disproportion are already seen in the next generation. Individuals with such severe malformations that they defy standard medical classifications are documented in photographs from the third generation of consanguinity. The development of the surviving children was accompanied by a longitudinal study conducted between 1980 and 1995. That even with intensive medical intervention and access to specialized education, the genetic damage was largely permanent and progressive was confirmed by the results. Only 9 of the 17 children initially removed from the property survived until 1995, as most had significantly reduced life expectancy. In academic discussions about ethics, genetics, and social responsibility, the Boudreau case is often cited. How could a family practice consanguinity for generations, resulting in visible and growing human suffering, without external intervention? The central question remains. This was not just a genetic phenomenon, but a societal failure, reflects social worker Ellie Carter, who accompanied the case for decades. At some level, the surrounding community was aware of the existence of this isolated family. There were rumors, stories, but the situation was allowed to persist for decades by the combination of excessive respect for family privacy, local superstitions about the inhabitants of the swamps, and simple indifference. In 1998, 20 years after the initial discovery, interviews with residents of the region were conducted by historian Dr. Michelle Thibault, documenting pre-existing community knowledge about the Boudreaux. Her results were disturbing. Since childhood, many people admitted to hearing stories about the strange family of the swamps, but they considered it part of regional folklore or deliberately ignored the rumors. "We knew something was not right," confessed a local merchant who occasionally sold supplies to Jerome Boudreau. Maybe twice a year, Jerome always came to town alone, and bought huge amounts of basic supplies. He was reserved, spoke strangely. Though discreetly, the legacy of the Boudreaux manifests itself today, scattered throughout Louisiana's institutions and adoptive families. The consequences of decisions made by their ancestors are carried in their bodies and minds by the younger survivors, now adults. A reminder of the dangers of prolonged consanguinity and extreme social isolation is represented by their continuous medical problems. That we can precisely track genetic deterioration through multiple documented human generations is what makes the Boudreaux such a significant case, explains Dr. Jason Landry, a geneticist who continued to study the case. That the founder effect in the Boudreaux family was even more significant than initially estimated was revealed by contemporary genetic analyzers, using technologies not available at the time of the initial discovery. Recessive genes for at least 5 rare conditions were already carried by Jean-Baptiste Boudreaux, the original ancestor who settled in the region in 1850. These traits were dramatically expanded by repeated consanguinity, resulting in the extraordinary concentration of anomalies observed in children born in the 1970s. In a cruel irony, a nature reserve eventually absorbed the original property of the Boudreaux in 1990. Only partially submerged ruins of the original structures remain today, gradually being claimed by the swamps. The small cemetery was documented but left intact by decision of the authorities. Its simple wooden crosses have long since deteriorated. Significant changes in social work practices in rural areas of Louisiana were generated by the case. To identify isolated families, outreach programs were implemented, and specific training to recognize signs of consanguinity and intervene appropriately was received by health professionals. Only 3 adult members of the original Boudreaux generation still lived as of 2020. An anonymous interview for an academic study was given by Alice Boudreaux, one of the few who partially adapted to conventional life. "I don't blame my parents or grandparents. They didn't know what they were doing," she said. "They believed they were protecting the family, but the price we paid. No one should go through what our children went through." The history of the Boudreaux remains one of the most documented examples of the effects of prolonged human consanguinity, concludes Dr. Robert Thibodeau, who has studied the case from the beginning. It is a tragedy that should never have happened and which continues to provide important lessons for geneticists, social workers, and legislators about the balance between family autonomy and the social responsibility of preventing predictable damage. It is because you like this story if you watched so far. So I can meet you and know who really likes the stories here on the channel. Leave a comment saying, "I watched here." With people who are also interested in these revealing stories about the darkest secrets of society, be sure to like this video and share it. Check it out if you are already subscribed to this channel, as we have many other shocking and educational stories about similar cases that you will not find anywhere else. Just a scientific curiosity or a warning tale is not what the case of the Boudreaux is. It is a reminder of the fragility of the human genome when subject to extreme conditions and the collective responsibility we have to protect the most vulnerable, even when they are hidden in the shadows of the swamps, far from the eyes of society.